So, welcome to this research seminar, webinar at IIM Ahmedabad, which is a part of our research and publication series, webinar series. So, I would request everybody to, if possible, to please put on your videos, but keep your audios off. But that is optional to you. You can do that the way you want. But I am very delighted to host Professor Ranjan Ghosh and Dr. Chandan Jha for the presentation today. The topic is extremely topical, I would say. Very, very interesting topic, the role of food and land use systems in achieving India's sustainability targets. Sustainability is a buzzword all over the world. Sustainable Development Goals 2015 have been established, and then 190 plus countries have signed on those goals. Goal number 2 is food, is talking about no poverty and food related items. So with this in mind, agriculture and forest land use have been extremely interesting topics. For if you see India, we emitted as a country 3.3 billion ton of CO2 equivalent in 2019. This is our estimation. And this is about 16 or 17, the global emissions are 16 or 17 times more than this, 54, 55 billion tons. We are supporting 16% of global population, but our emissions are hardly 6%. So this is the first point. Agriculture is important because it provides food. Forestry is important because about 60% of our population is dependent on rain-fed agriculture, rain-fed forestry. Out of this 3.3 billion ton in 2019, about 15% were emitted by agriculture. And almost similar, unconnected, similar number was sequestered by forestry sector. That is, we saved almost 330 million ton of CO2 emissions. So this is a very, very integrated thing, because we are dealing with many small farmers, marginal farmers, people who may not have any big economic financial support. So this topic is very, very topical in today's conditions. So I request Ranjan and Chandan to please make the presentation. The floor is yours, of course, for next 30 minutes. And I would also, I think Chandan has agreed, and Ranjan, that any intervention midway is also all right. But maybe during the presentation, they will clarify some doubts, they'll clarify anyway. So if you can hold your horses, good. If you cannot, please go ahead. So the floor is yours, Ranjan and Chandan, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Amit Garg, for this very interesting introduction and really charging us up. I mean, I really, before your brief prep talk, I didn't really know it was so exciting and interesting. And so this is really encouraging, because as you rightly said, this is something which like agriculture, food, forestry, we see around, but the connections, we think of agriculture, we think of adaptation, we think of the problems farmers are facing, because as we see, we can very easily see that the cropping cycles are tremendously affected. This is no more a fiction, but for the last few years, if we have traveled, if we have been conscious, daily we can read news of what an impact these changing climate patterns have on the production of our food system, which is extremely crucial. Here, what we do is we focus on the mitigation aspects of the food and agriculture sector, which, as you rightly said, is a very significant proportion, almost if you account for associated sectors, agriculture, forestry, almost close to 1/4 of the emissions globally, and also in India. So there is a huge, tremendous potential. So that is what we are going to deal with. But before that, I would really like to thank also the Research and Publication Office for facilitating it, especially the chairperson, Professor Devjit Roy, for kind of encouraging and pushing and in fact creating this whole setup where we can exchange our ideas. It's really nice and interesting. We can talk to, of course, at the moment, on a web platform with Zoom without the samosas and the coffees and chais, but I'm sure that once we are all confident enough to meet physically, it will be more personal. But this is an absolutely fantastic mode, and I think we have participants connecting from all over India, possibly whoever is interested in globally, in fact. So this is really nice for us to showcase our work at IIM Ahmedabad, but more importantly, to take feedback for our ongoing work, which is extremely important for scholars to actually have an interaction. Sometimes we work in our own silos. We don't have the time or the bandwidth to engage with others. I think, thank you so much, Devjit, for this. Thank you, Professor Amit Garg, for agreeing to moderate. It's really an honor for us, who are trying to understand the sector and trying to do some research, because you have been one of the leading lights, in fact, in the sector, especially working on agriculture, so on energy and mitigation, so many other aspects of climate change. No need to introduce you. But thank you very much for agreeing. It is really encouraging that you are taking an interest in our work. So that's a first tick for us. So, but we will see, we'll go ahead, and we really invite all of the participants here to be critical, to think, if you can think of, immediate comments, please, you can write it in the chat box, you can raise your hand in the participant pane, and we can have a discussion, or even after the talk, which we are trying to see in the 20-25 minutes, where we'll try to, run through our results, give an overview of what we are trying to do. And then even if that's not sufficient, then maybe even after the webinar, any time, we'll be very happy to receive your feedback, because this is an ongoing work. We are planning to go ahead with publishing this. So, and publications of work like this, as Professor Amit Garg knows, it's an extremely high political and policy relevance of domestic politics and policy, but also global politics and policy. So thank you very much to everyone for attending. And for the next 20-25 minutes, we'll just present a summary overview of what we are doing and why we are doing. Okay, thank you. So I'll just give the introduction, and then I'll hand over to Dr. Chandan Jha, who is leading this FABLE program from the technical side, and he has been setting up the model, so he will be able to talk about the technical aspects, and then we will take the questions and have the discussions. So back and forth, we'll be presenting. So Chandan, is it okay if I share the screen for the time I'm presenting, and maybe you can share later, or maybe I can continue sharing and you can speak. So let's do that. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Amit Garg, Professor Devjit, and we'll start. So can you see, Chandan, everyone?
Yes, I can see that.
Okay. Yeah, and it moves. Okay, so we are just, as Professor Amit said, we are just trying to understand kind of the first steps towards understanding what the food and land use systems are, in that sense, in the perspective of the sustainability targets, in the perspective of our climate goals, GHG emissions. That is what we are trying to do here. See how much of this, we are contributing, but what are the pathways by which we can achieve sustainable or sustainability in this. But more to come on that. Before that, I would like to give a brief about the broader context of this work and why it is important to discuss, although this is a purely technical, scholarly, discussion, but it's very important to understand the context in which we are making this presentation and this work is going on. So this is basically under the FABLE umbrella, which is a very grand 20-country plus consortium, which has set up in 2017. And I was fortunate enough to be part of the first global meeting in December 2017. And therefore, 20, I think that was like 14 or 15 countries that time. I mean, we are taking EU as one block. So in reality, there are many countries, more countries. And there was a great excitement in terms of trying to understand the dynamics of the food and land use sector, because as Professor Amit can, vouch for it, or maybe, correct me, but last 30, 40 years, the discussion on climate transitions and the climate change challenges have been on energy, transport, associated sectors, which is, of course, the largest, the biggest cat, to bell. However, there has been, and there have been discussions on adaptation in terms of the impacts climate change has on vulnerable population. Most of it is working in the agriculture and rural sector. But there is an increasing, awareness that the food system overall, not just agriculture production side, but up to, the consumption side, which includes food waste. So there is food production, which is agriculture. There is food transmission, which is distribution, and there are a lot of losses. And then there's food waste, post-consumption losses. So we are not going to the details of that in this part, but eventually we also want to tackle that through this kind of work. But just to give you a primer, rule of thumb is that 30% of the food which we produce globally is actually wasted post-consumption. Now that could feed some entire continents in that sense, right? So there is, and that food wasted is actually impacting the climate severely, because that is so much of agriculture, so much of production, which leads to greenhouse gas emissions, which lead to other dynamics, actually going waste. So all of this together, in terms of the nitrogen use, the fertilizer, use of fertilizer, and the fact that agriculture and increasing agriculture leads to severe land use changes. Where do you get land from? So we have, like, it's a cake. You have a limited size for the natural resources of the globe, and any activity you do impacts the others. So for example, you increase agriculture, probably you have to either take up forestry land. If you're also increasing livestock, which is part of agriculture, then you need pasture land. If you're extensifying agriculture, you need to use more water, that is groundwater resources. Just giving examples of how complicated it is and the impacts of agriculture in terms of what it produces, the output of that, the non-crop output, which includes pollution, water pollution, nitrogen leaching, and all of that. So it's a very complicated, integrated, issue. And although it's relatively 1/4 of the global emissions, but the impact, given that the vulnerability of the population dependent on it, and the complexity which is required to bring a transition is immense. So, Professor Amit can vouch, but the transition in the energy sector took like 30, 40 years to actually even start to have an agreement. And then, policymakers, stakeholders started to agree. Sometimes started to agree to disagree. And then, slowly these efforts of whether it's a COP, the climate, the conference of parties, different forums, people started to understand. Then there was a take-up from the policymakers, eventually trickling down to consumers, users, and producers, that is the energy producers either. So there is now thinking that, okay, we need to shift from traditional fossil-based fuel production. But that took up so much time. But look at the stakeholders involved. These are usually either the policymakers, the big businesses, coal-fired power plants owners. Those are where the real stakeholder, where the real change, and of course the consumers in terms of the behavioral aspects. But look at the complexities of if you want to bring a change in the agriculture and the food sector. These are, most of the world, at least the large, significant proportion of the developing world, at least, where the impacts of climate change are high, are smallholder farmers with very small farms, extremely, under dire poverty conditions, very rigid behavioral issues in terms of bringing any change, very real structural constraints. So the complexities are immense, and the interrelations. If you look at the entire supply chain, the value chain, or let's say if we take a food supply chain, is of course immense. So the complexity of thinking and bringing stakeholders together itself is a very challenging process. Bringing people to the same platform is a very challenging process. This is what the FABLE consortium has tried to do under a broader advocacy platform called the Food and Land Use Coalition, called FOLU, which is bringing all the big policymakers, think tanks, thinkers globally to to different platforms but trying to think together in terms of how can we how can we achieve sustainability, or how can we produce food sustainability, achieve nutritional security, have what we require, have good food security, but at the same time, damage the environment as less as possible, be as climate friendly as possible, and contribute to the objectives of achieving, net zero climate emissions in a few decades from now. So this is, the context of under which this has happened. And this FABLE consortium specifically is led by YASA, which is one of the leading global think tanks, research organizations based out of Vienna, and the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which is also research advocacy. And we work, the consortium works with all the major policy think tanks and big governments to come up with primary output, scientific assessments, and then to eventually communicate that to policymakers to start a thinking process on this. IIM Ahmedabad has been a part of the thinking and the seed for this ever since it started. So it has actively participated what we do as part of the FABLE. So FABLE is the technical scientific wing of FOLU, which is the larger platform. And this is at present, I think 21 countries, where, to say very simple, what we see here, as you can see, there's a FABLE calculator. Basically, all these 21 countries feeding all their food and land use related data in one platform. So imagine the monstrosity or the scale of the operations involved. All of this is put in a common platform, which is a kind of a decision-making tool. And then there are what we call as synathons, where together all these countries try to achieve sustainable outcomes. So targets are set in terms of, let's say, by 2050 net zero, by 2050 zero food security, zero hunger, and all of these important, minimizing fertilizer use, all of the zero food waste, all of these targets are set. And then all these countries, we put in our data, and there are, of course, algorithms which help find out under what conditions we achieve an equilibrium, a sustainable equilibrium. Now, once we identify those, then we can go back and say that, okay, what are the pathways required to actually achieve those? And the best thing about this globally integrated platforms is that there is trade, which means we know which country is trading what based on present data, and then they're extrapolated, projected in the future using models. And then we also can see the trade linkages. So there is a global balance. So that's a very interesting exercise. India, we of course do the FABLE calculator, but we also do a very scientific economic model called MACPI, a model for agricultural production and impacts on the environment, which is set up by the Potsdam Institute of Climate Change. And our first 2-3 years went in just scaling down and making the MACPI model workable for India, because these are the models which take 15-20 years to develop. Entire global data at the maximum resolution possible is actually inserted into that. And so this is what we have done so far. We have made MACPI applicable for India. So that's the first achievement. And now we are trying to run some analysis and see if we can feed our policy, we can what are the initial results and all of that. So we'll see those details later. Now, why do we want to see that? We already discussed a little bit of that. What is the problem we are trying to tackle here in terms of the agri-food sector and the global sustainability problems? As we see, India's share of emissions has increased over the last couple of decades, and agriculture, livestock, forestry, land use sectors contribute a significant proportion, while we have committed in the Paris Agreement to reduce the emissions intensity by 33 to 35%. While India's population is projected to grow at a high pace using current trends up to 1.6 billion, for example, and that, of course, with increasing incomes implies, and by standard elasticities of these diets from economics, various economic studies, we know that it is going to shift more towards animal-based protein, which means dairy and meat and all of that. Now that is going to add further to land pressure. So where are you going to grow the feed required for the livestock? Where are you going to feed let the pasture land for the livestock? And what are the impacts of producing more animal-based protein? So that is going to add to the pressures of land in terms of bringing land use change. So basically, we are asking, how will India meet its developmental targets and at the same time achieve its sustainability targets? So what we do is we, in the lines of SSP, shared socioeconomic pathways, which Chandan will talk about later, in a partial equilibrium modeling approach, which is this MACMI model. And we make an integrated assessment of India's commitments. And why we are saying integrated is because we are looking at all the factors which are related to the food, agriculture, land use, forestry, resource, water sectors. All of that is put together. Now, why do we need an integrated model? Now, for example, there is a policy. That policy has a certain impact, and we know that. So, for example, there is a pricing policy, right? The MSP for a certain crop increases, the minimum support price, for those who may not know. That has an impact on what the production cycle will be for the next season, because farmers are driven to a great extent. I'm just using an example. That's not the only factor. But we all know that to a great extent, the support prices which farmers receive drive their behavior in terms of what crops to grow. So, for example, if chickpea or is particular pulse or castor, the MSP increases, farmers are very likely that they will grow that in the next season. So we look at what is the analysis, what is the price increase, how will farmers react to that? We calculate the response function, we calculate the elasticities, we find out that, okay, if there is a certain increase in the prices which farmers are expected to get from as a minimum support floor price, then this is how much the cropping pattern will change, and this is how much production will be, or this is, and that may have some impact on the per capita incomes of the farmers, and all of that standard analysis. So that's a non-integrated single point analysis, single dimension analysis. Integrated assessment is where you look at all the aspects. So, for example, I'll give you one small example. India has come up with a new biofuel policy recently, which is targeted very, nobly towards solving partially the energy problem and the food residue and waste problem, the crop residue and waste problem. So, which means now, as per the new biofuel policy, the government is encouraging for the second generation biofuels as feedstock different crop residues. For example, sugar beet, rice, wheat, those residues. Because what does it do? It solves two problems. One is, of course, you can meet your increasing blending targets of biofuel in the traditional fuel mix, but also that if there is crop residues, for example, in Punjab and northern parts of India, there's a huge problem of crop residue burning. So then farmers have an incentive to actually sell that and get a price for that. So creates a market. Now, one can think of that, one can analyze that. What will an integrated assessment do? It will. So what we think of how we are seeing this, for example, that problem here. And we are in fact working on that problem in the new biofuel policy as a separate paper. So sometime in a few months, once we're ready, we'll try to present that also. So what we will do is, okay, but what does it do to the agriculture sector? Well, it increases the price for livestock feed, right? So if residues now are have a value, then the lot of crop residues are just available to livestock for easy feed. Now that is not going to happen. So that will increase the feed costs. That has an implication on the entire feed basket and the economics of that. That will of course also have an impact on how you produce livestock, which means it may require a change from the current patterns, which means it could go towards a more mechanical, more industrial method, which may have an impact on intensities. It may also mean that you want more land now, and more residues, which means conversion of more of forest land and other lands towards for livestock feeding. Also, it will of course so if there is again an increased value for residues, then there is less available for our livestock. So it has a tremendous different kind of impact on natural resources, on economics, on prices, and we would like to look at the entire range of impacts which a simple biofuel policy have in terms of how does it change the farmer's incentive, what impact it has on in production, what impact it has on the natural resource use, on the land use, and all of that. So therefore, we try to look at all the aspects which are this covers. So that is the kind of, so when you have a model setup which looks of course that has impacts on trade, that has impacts on crop substitution. So for example, one agriculture, there is a thinking towards reducing dependence on rice and wheat, because rice and wheat are very water intensive crops, and they are not probably sufficient to to preserve our natural resources, right? But therefore, if we have this new biofuel policy, then there is now no more incentive. That there is a clash with the incentives of the farmers. Do they now sell? If they have to sell, they will produce more rice and wheat, which the agriculture policy is trying to disincentivize. So at one hand, we are trying to disincentivize rice and wheat. On the other hand, another policy incentivizes higher production of rice and wheat, because now farmers, if there is a waste, if there is a residue, they can sell and get. How do we understand and reconcile these? What is the net impact? How do we understand the dynamics of it? For cross-sectoral analysis, it's important that we have integrated assessment. That is what this platform is doing. And of course, it targets different SDGs. We don't need to go into the details of that. So with this background, we focus on key indicators of GHG emissions, land use change, food security, water use, and food self-sufficiency. I will hand over now to Dr. Chandan, who will give a little bit of more details in terms of what we do, how we do, and what are the initial results we are getting in terms of how do we perceive and see our future in 2030 and 2050 in terms of where our food and land use sector will be and where are the changes which are possible. Yes, there is a hand raise, Maya.
Yeah, Ranjan, a quick clarification question. So when you say multiple pathways, do I think of them as multiple underlying mechanisms, or do I think of them as the multiple conflicting results that you just now mentioned?
No. So these are basically multiple pathways. You'll get a clarity. We'll just hand over to Dr. Chandan. So there are three pathways. One is the current trend, kind of in a set of current trend scenarios. So if it's business as usual, simply said, then that's one pathway. What is a pathway we are seeing if we go business as usual? Then the other is, what is the pathway we see if we want to implement healthy diets, and that Dr. Chandan will talk about. What is the pathway we see if we are aiming for a greater sustainability, so if we want to meet our sustainability targets. So these are the three pathways, but I think that will be clear very soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Chandan.
Yeah, Chandan. Pathways are alternate futures, no? The storylines.
True.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Amit and Professor Ranjan, for setting up the entire background of this study. Moving towards what methodology we have applied to assess the role of food and land use system to achieve the sustainability targets. As Professor Ranjan has mentioned about the MACPI model, the modeling agriculture productivity and its impact on agriculture. So MACPI is actually a recursive dynamic optimization model which minimize the cost of consecutive time slice with a length of 5 to 20 years until 2100. And the time steps for this optimization is 5 years. Actually, we provide the results on 5 years interval. The resolutions of this model is the three spaces. We have global regions, entire global region, where we have taken 5 to 20 world region, and at this stage, at this point, India has been represented as a separate region in this modeling exercise. And on the separate region, we have actually special clusters where we define we provide the biophysical information to the model at 0.5 degree into 0.5 degree. The entire agriculture production system and all has been defined at this special clusters level. So what we balance here, we bring together together the biophysical, plant growth, carbon, nutrition, and water, and club it with the economic aspects also, like the cost, prices, demand, policy, and the several demographic factors also, like the populations, etc. So the model's objective function is to fulfill the demand of crops, livestock, and the material products from agriculture sectors. What we give constraint over here is we give a constraints about the boundaries of the land. We all know that the land is constant, and to feed the increasing populations, we have to use in a very optimal way so that our natural vegetations, our forest area will not get impacted. So we provide this kind of constraint. We have boundaries of land, water, yield informations. We know that how much technological change can achieve, the sustainable intensification can achieve the yield improvements, and also the monetary factors which include the GDP, net incomes, and all these parameters. So the biophysical information actually in this model is come from hydrological crop models. In this field, we are having several climate models, several crop models, but we use a very specific crop models for this purpose, which is Lune Postam Genome Managed Land Model, LPGML model, which provide the biophysical information to the entire exercise. So based on this entire model setup, we try to find out, we give information about our business as usual pathways, how our future, based on the current trends, how we are going towards 2030 and 2050. We implement we give some policy shock to the business as usual scenarios, like Ranjan has discussed about the biofuel policy. There's the healthy diet things and all these parameters. So what parameterization we use in this model is our major assumptions is based on the shared socioeconomic pathways, which was defined by a group of the global scientists. The shared socioeconomic pathways is actually a package of several assumptions. We particularly usually talk about, in this study, we are going to talk about SSP1 and SSP2. SSP1 is the sustainability parameters. So how this sustainable socioeconomic pathways one has been defined. It's actually defined the world shifts gradually, but previously towards a more sustainable path. It's emphasized the management of the global commons, which is slowly improves, and education and health investment also improve to have some kind of demographic transitions. Per se, we assume under SSP1, India's population by 2050 will be 1.5 billion, which is, the normal projections say, the population says India's population will be 1.7 billion. So why we are taking these lower assumptions here? We assume under SSP1 is the socioeconomic and demographic parameters will improve, the education among the women will improve, and awareness will improve. This will control. So this is how we are controlling the population and saying that the population will be bit lower from the current projection size. So this define the overall this SSP1 defined overall commitments of each country towards achieving sustainable development goals. There is availability of the policy for mitigation activities. So this is how it's defined term as taking the green road. It said we are towards the green road, we are towards achieving the sustainable parameters. So SSP3, which is completely opposite to SSP1, which says we are not thinking much about the environmental benefits and all. Let's say taking the example of inverse Kuznets curve, which says when we are in the developing stage, we really don't think about environmental benefits. So, but in this study, we take our current status, current trends as a middle of the road, which define SSP2, in a very short form, it says there is a moderate effort available towards achieving sustainable development goals, towards smooth demographic transitions. There is towards and yes, of course, it's a mix of healthy diets and the current form of diets. So in addition to that, we have representative constellation pathways where we talk about how the climate change will look like for India. And we have given some additional parameterization to the model, which is Eat Lancet recommendations, which says the planetary healthy diets will define the global healthy diet scenarios. Next slide. So what scenarios and pathways we have taken under this study? The broader objective of this study to see how we can progress towards Paris Agreement, Bonn Challenge, and CBD, which is the biodiversity commitment at the international levels. So to show the transition toward that, we have taken 3 pathways over here, which the current trends is SSP2. So under this pathways, we have talked about the several parameters, which is populations, which I said already, if it is in the line of SSP2, which means the India population will be 1.7 billion in 2050. We are talking about the moderate increase in the GDP things. We are talking about food demand also, which is in the line of SSP2. We say the demand for livestock products will be a bit higher than business as usual things, but it's a mix of cereals, pulses, and the higher livestock products. We are talking about food loss also, which is 20% food-based scenario here. We are talking about the feed efficiency, climate change here, RCP 6.0, which says the India's, the temperature will be around 3 to 4% by 2050, increase by 3 to 4% by 2050. And then our water demand water demand is completely impacted by the climate change scenario we are taking. In addition to that, we have taken some policy, current policy scenario also here, which is India's commitment in the Bone challenge, which is we have promised to restore 21 million hectare of forest area by 2030. So we have given this SOC under this scenario, and we have assumed that there is a medium interest rate. So we are talking about the technological change over here. So our assumption is there will be a moderate increase in technological change, but not much high. It will match a current trend, and the technological change in our model is coming from the risk accounting factor. So we are assuming that the interest rate will be around 7%, and which will impact our technological change. So similarly, we are assuming something about trade, where we are saying that the trade liberalizations will be at the moderate level. We are defining a 10% trade liberalization for the secondary and livestock products by 2030 and 2050, and 20% for the crops. And for the bioenergy, we are saying that the demand will be constant at the current rate. So moving further, our second scenario is current trend plus 8, where we are targeting SDG 3, good health and well-being. And here we are including the Eat Lancet dietary recommendations. And then we have a sustainable pathways, where we have included, as I have explained under SSP2, we have taken scenarios for demographic and climatic factors, but these are in the line of SSP1, where we are saying that we are transiting towards green road. Here the difference is, of course, the all demographic assumptions are in the line of SSP1. The climate change is talking about RCP 2.6, which says there is a 2 degree increase into overall temperature by 2050. And then the water demand is impacted by climate change, and we have given additional resource efficiency, which is environmental flow protections, which says which stop the over extractions of the water. And in addition to that, we have given 26 million hectare forest restoration target, which is 5 million hectare addition to 21 million. In recent years to 26. So based on that, and then of course we are taking the assumption of higher technological change. We are saying that the trade will be more liberalized under these scenarios. And in addition to that, we have a bioenergy assumption, which we have included the National Biofuel Policy 2018, which says the 20% blending target for petrol and 5% blending target for biodiesel. So overall objective of this pathway is to achieve SDG 2, zero hungers, SDG 3, and SDG 7s, 12, 13, and 15. So now very quickly what we are focusing, we have a different outcomes of this from this model, but in principle, we are going to talk about the land use change, food security, food prices, water, and greenhouse gas emissions. So what we're going to see over here is how our land, and we are more worried about the land is a very constant thing. So the boundary has been very constant for our entire to feed our entire populations and all development parameters, rapid urbanization and everything. So what we are going to see over here is how our land use change is going to look like under different scenarios. So what we're seeing here in 2010, under all three scenarios, you will not see any change in the land use dynamics. It's a complete constant, because all the policy shocks, all the information which we are which we are giving to the model is happening between 2020 to 2030. So in 2030, you will see that under current trend and current trend plus 8, there is an increase in forest area, which is directly coming from we have implemented the Bone Challenge over here, where we are saying that we will increase the forest area to meet a 21 million hectare target by 2030. So you can see that changes over here. Now you can also see there is an increase in the cropland. Why this cropland increase is happening under almost in all three scenarios. So under current trend and current plus 8, of course, the population is increasing from 2010 to 2030. That things are also there. Then under current plus 8, the food demand dynamics is changing. We have said that there is the Eat Lancet implementations. So now slightly in 2030, the food demand is shifting from cereals to fruits, fruit, vegetable, nuts, and pulses. So we are saying that it's a constant, but the internal dynamics, I mean, when we will see the crop wise result, we will see the internal dynamics is changing over here. Why we are saying this under sustainable pathways, even in 2030 or in 2050, the cropland is slightly decreasing, despite of the fact that we have given the policy shock of biofuel policy, which says we need additional crops to basically sugarcane. We have given information about our biofuel demand will meet through the sugarcane, but we are not seeing a large increase in the land in the cropland. The reason is we are assuming here the higher crop productivity. We have said that the technological change will be high. The technological change has been defined here as a sustainable technological change, which says least use of fertilizer, but the technological change contribution in the crop build will be high. So it's increasing the crop productivity. It's also, and another thing is we have assumed that the population will be bit lower from the current trend. What current trend says the population in 2050, it's going to be bit lower than that. So we are seeing that we are not adding any pressures on the cropland under the sustainable when we are going to achieve the sustainability targets. Of course, there is a change in forest area, which is directly coming from the Bone Challenge, and the pasture yield is decreasing because in 2050 under Eat Lancet, the demand for livestock product is bit lower. Next slide. Next slide. So what change here in terms of the change in food demand? We have, as we said, we have implemented under current trend plus Eat and under sustainable pathways, we have implemented Eat Lancet recommendations. And the Eat Lancet recommendations shows here is the demand, the dependency on the cereals and the dairy product has decreased in 2050. And pulses, fruits, vegetables, and nuts, and the poultry and oil crops increase in 2050. So we have seen that the overall dynamics, how the entire food basket is changing with the implementation of this Eat Lancet recommendations. So another parameter here is to see whether it's impacting our food prices, comparing with the current trend. With the current trend plus Eat, does Eat Lancet implementation having any impact on food prices? We can see that there is something, if you compare current and current plus 8, it says there is a slight increase in food prices, which is directly coming from, like, in initial periods, we are not much, society is not much habituals for the production of, from the supply side. So it and sustainable path, Lancet recommendations is also per se biofuel policy. So we are adding a pressure on the resources, which increasing the prices. So another parameter to see here is the trade self-sufficiency, which means like trade self-sufficiency. So are we self-sufficient to meet our global, our population's demand when we are transiting towards sustainable pathways? We are seeing that when the demand for pulses, fruit, vegetables increases, the self-sufficiency also decrease under the pathways, as we know that. In India, the major subsidies is going towards cereals and other commodity, which make the prices of that product bit lower. But we are not providing larger subsidy to fruit, vegetables, and nuts product. So that's also you can see the impact of that policies over here. Like our self-sufficiency is decreasing under the scenarios, and also for the dairy product, our self-sufficiency decrease the most in the current +8. So now another resource parameters we are looking here is the water use in agriculture. Under current trend and current +8, we are seeing that the irrigation, the water use is increasing very large, but under sustainable pathways, we are seeing the water withdrawal from agriculture is decreasing. It's mainly, as I said, we are seeing here the dietary change parameters. We are also implemented environmental flow protections, which impact the over extractions of the resources, and also the climate scenarios, which is we are saying about the 2-degree world, and under the current and current +8, we are saying that it's a 3 to 4 degree world. So combination of these policies and this parameters is having impact on water withdrawal agriculture, which is making a list. Water withdrawal for agriculture is actually decreasing under sustainable pathways. So one of the interesting results to see over here. We all are talking about the net zero future, where we are going to, whether we are able to achieve zero net emissions by 2030 or 2050 or not, and how the food and land use sector is going to contribute in that targets. So what our complete pathways is seeing here, compared to the current trend +8, only the implementation of the EAT Lancet recommendations is showing the GHG emission reduces by almost 51% in compared to the current trend, which means, we have directly seen that by 2050, the demand for the livestock products, the dairy products is decreasing under when we are implementing EAT Lancet recommendations. And in the entire sectors, the livestock sector is one of the largest contributions of emissions, and that emissions is, and from the livestock sector, our main emissions is coming from enteric fermentation, which means the all animals which is producing the dairy products is actually a major source of emissions. So our dependency, and of course, dependency on the livestock products is also decreasing under EAT Lancet recommendations. So we are able to reduce almost 51% of total emission by 2050. So when we talk about the sustainable pathways, we have seen that the additional 17%, what we are achieving through EAT Lancet, in addition to that, there's in addition 17% population GDP reduction is increasing, which making almost 67% in compared to the current trend. So what leading this emission reduction is, of course, we talked about the EAT Lancet things, but other parameters where we talk about SSP 1 parameterization, where the population is low, we are talking about fertilizer use. We have said that we are talking about sustainable intensification under this scenario, where crop yield is maximum coming from technological change and less coming from fertilizer usage. And the feed efficiency, which make, our livestock productivity has been defined through feed efficiency here. When we say there is an improvement in the feed efficiency, which means the improvement in the entire livestock production system. So our livestock productivity is also increasing, and also we have implemented the bioenergy, new biofuel policy, which contributing towards this. So we are seeing that under sustainable pathways, we are almost reducing 67% GHG emission in terms of, and compared with the current trend pathways. Thank you, Professor Ranjan. Hand over to you for concluding this study.
Okay, so I think, just to conclude, so one thing before I conclude is how we, why we do this pathway analysis and how do we read this? Just to, say in a layman's term, I think we have to end now in 2 minutes, and then we'll open the floor for questions. Is that we feed all of this information in a model based on real data, complicated, integrated, where we have not gone into the technical details of how a partially fluid model works here. We can discuss that separately because that's a different topic. It's a very detailed topic. But what happens is when we feed these parameters, we get a certain result. And we set those targets, and we see that if we feed in, if we want to achieve a sustainable goal, and we, what will lead when we feed a certain thing with a different permutations combination, can we achieve those sustainability targets? For example, zero hunger, nutritional security, zero net emissions. When we feed all of this, and if we can meet that, that is what we use to backcast to say that, okay, if we do X, Y, Z, then, this is what we will observe and this is what is possible. That is what we're going to say. So this is how we need to read this before we conclude. So what can we conclude? What we are doing is we are creating 3 scenarios. We are just extending business as usual. What is happening currently in terms of the production, population, agricultural setup, we just project that in the future. That's, the current trends, the business as usual. Then we use some assumptions on diets and climate mitigation. We say that we want to achieve high mitigation, right? And we want to also achieve healthy diets, which means, nutrition, that is minimum dietary energy requirements, which are required by 2050 for all. When we do that, and then we say that on top of the current plus the Eat Lancet based nutritional security, food security scenario, we also add different assumptions in terms of ambitious targets on mitigation, population, and different other scenarios which Chandan discussed already in that slide. That's what gives us these 3 trajectories. So we see that in the second scenario and third scenario, which has these dietary changes, if we bring, what essentially we are saying is that if we bring these dietary changes consistent with the Eat Lancet recommendation, then we can achieve an emissions reduction of 51%, as our results are saying. This is 51%, ignore the units on this. So it is possible, additional 17%, is possible if, we actually do improvements in livestock feed efficiency, we implement the biofuel policy, we achieve the afforestation target. So which means if we do, we meet the bond challenge, we do sufficient afforestation, we intensify. So how are we getting this model results? When we give information to the model in terms of the intensity of livestock use. So if we do feed, feed intensification, livestock intensification, agricultural intensification, meet our forestation, that is reduce deforestation, and how that can be done by shifting away from, major current crops, but moving towards more pulses, fruits, nuts, vegetables, as we see in our results, rather than what we are doing in our current trends, that is business as usual. So if we do this, then it is possible to achieve sustainability and to meet our targets and to actually, be on a sustainable pathway. Now, so this is what we say based on the model. We feed this and we say that it is possible to achieve under these conditions. How do we achieve those conditions? What are the policies required to actually achieve that is what we can use this to backcast and say that if we, for example, we have policies which facilitate, livestock intensification, which facilitate, input use intensification, which, if the national biofuel policy is implemented properly, and if we have policies which, help us achieve the afforestation targets, then it is possible that we can achieve our climate targets to a great extent, and we can also achieve nutritional security. So this is how, this is an exercise we do to give. So we want to thank this is just me and Chandan are just the presenters, but we have a big team here I am here, and a global team who are all working together on this. So we would like to thank everyone for this. And with this, I now open the floor for questions. But I think we already have some questions in our chat. And I think it's nice, Chandan, that we take them before we proceed. So I'll just read them out, and maybe, we can take one of them. So for example, there's a question on what explains the dip in the food prices post 2030. Chandan, would you like to?
So, yeah, thanks, Professor Vidya, for this very interesting question. So under the sustainable pathways, we have seen the dip in 2030. This is mainly because the most of the policy shocks which we have given under sustainable pathways is to achieve by 2030. And one of the contributing factor here is the biofuel biofuel policy. So when we have implemented that, we have seen to meet this biofuel target, the production of the sugarcane increasing, and we have restricted the trade of the secondary products within the model for biofuel purpose, which is like we have to be self-sufficient to produce sugar to meet this biofuel demand. And based on that, we have seen that it's directly competing with the many major food crops. That's making this food prices deep in 2030.
And does the new forest land include plantation lands as well?
No,
that's a question from
that's not include the plantations and the salt rotations. I mean, this is something like the complete how we define the forest area. It's based on that calculations.
Okay. So I think Professor Amit had some comments on the resolution and on the models. Would you like to just talk about that?
Actually, it is a very good work. First, I thank Ranjan and Chandan and the team for very good job. Fable team also. You see the resolution, there are some other models which are top-down models, some are bottom-up models. The difference lies in resolution. The resolution, the more finer one gets, the more challenging it becomes, because you have to match at that level. Maybe it goes up to 30 meters by 30 meters. That is hugely challenging. So that is something which I must compliment Ranjan and Chandan. You have gone to half degree, which is around 55 kilometer by 55 kilometer. That is good, but I understand that you are setting up, expanding the model in the phase 2 to go much deeper. So that is very good. And I think you're also going to link it up with climatic projections. So that also brings additional depth to the whole game. And also, I think the crop basket you have already captured as the incomes increase, people's food habits change. Of course, they still eat food, but they also take a lot of vegetables, milk products. So that may change the whole paradigm of such models. But I think the floor is open for anyone to put forth their comments, suggestions, or questions also.
Yes.
Maya, Ganesh, and Vidhi. Maya first.
Thank you. So I just have a quick question about generalizability. So in terms of the choices of the alternatives that you have made, so if I make some other choice, for instance, so can I say that this is in some sort of range where I know that if for a different alternative, this is where somewhere I might lie in the middle. So can I do that?
Oh, yes. I mean, this is the entire purpose of doing this exercise, to create as many pathways, reasonably achievable pathways based on the current data, the current trends which we're observing. And then what these SSPs basically do is give you a framework to create those scenarios. So you draw the scenarios from the SSPs, and you can that the whole objective is to create different variations of this. So for example, you can create different variations of population, projections for 2050, what will be the food demand, what will be the feed efficiency, or what are the technological changes. All of these different scenarios you can actually build in. Climate change, there are different scenarios already set up, so you can do that. And that is what we do. We create these multiple pathways to arrive at what are reasonably what are the reasonable alternative scenarios which we can work with. And that also has to be driven by the objectives, the policy objectives. So here in the entire Fable work, one of the objectives is that we want to achieve. And these are, of course, and these are all simulations. These are exercises. These are, technically driven intellectual exercises to see that can we achieve a healthy diet scenario where, globally speaking, but let's speak about India, where everybody is food secure, nutrition secure, and getting what they require in terms of the MDERs, at the same time that matches and that meets our sustainability goals. So for example, we can also meet our MDERs in 2050 by increased reliance on animal protein. But that increased reliance on animal protein will have an impact on the crop production because you need more land, more livestock. Where do you get land from? You have to deforest, you have to extract more groundwater. There are several impacts of that. So with all the scenarios, play of different scenarios, we are trying to say that where is the balance? That what will actually give us a minimum damage to the environment, minimum emissions, if we can meet the targets at the best, at the same time, help us achieve, nutritional security. So we use one scenario given by the Eat Lancet, committee, which gives a different, proportions in which food can be said. So what is the percentage of whole grains, tubers, vegetables, fruits, dairy foods, protein? So they give a percentage of the entire calorific intake per day. This is again a simulation, and we just impose that as an additional step, and we test for that. But we can also, and what we are trying to do is we can also, now we are actually trying to do, we tested for the Eat Lancet, and we said that, okay, by 2050, we can achieve Eat Lancet healthy diets with this level of, damage to the environment, whatever, this level of, other targets. So we cannot, in our results, we cannot achieve complete climate mitigation if we are targeting healthy diets, but we can achieve moderate mitigation. So we can achieve our security, but the more realistic is to apply the National Institute of Nutrition, the local dietary recommendations. The Eat Lancet is a global recommendation. Now, food diet is very localized and context-based. Now, what is globally standard may not be standard or suitable for an Indian. Even within India, there's so much variation. But let's say we talk about one Indian kind of diet. So we can create an Indian diet, which we can take from NI, nutritional requirements. We can create a scenario and then we can feed into the model. And so that can we achieve our diets, right? And also achieve in a balance with our mitigation and other targets as we discussed. So that is the purpose of doing this. I hope that's
Thank you.
Vidhi.
Thank you, Professor Ranjan and Chandan, for a very good presentation. It was good to see the outcomes and what's happening with Fable and all. I had just two quick points to clarify. One was around when you say climate change, and are you just looking at emissions and mitigation part of it, because that's what was clearly visible in this on the slides, but then there are impacts and which has implications for yield and crop loss, etc. So are we looking at adaptation or resilience or impacts and vulnerability here as a part of the climate change package or no?
Not in this specific approach, but Chandan, maybe you want to answer this, take this.
Maybe can you just repeat the last part of your question?
So are you looking at impacts and vulnerability and crop losses and yields because of various climate change situations? When you say under RCP 4.5.5, there would be some yield differences, right?
Yeah. So not exactly in this study, of course. I mean, we can look into that parameters also, but for this study we will stick to some certain parameters, but we are extending our this study, and this is one of the objective we are working right now to see how the different climate scenarios is going to impact the crop productivity, and of course we are extending towards how we can close the yield gaps with alternative scenarios. This is of course one of the objective of further work.
Yeah, and the other question was around livestock, and also an extension of your discussion on fruit and vegetable consumption. So with the livestock, you're looking at intensification of the system, or an extensive system continues where there are small holders, and because you don't mention that dairy decreases. Yeah.
So we have, for the livestock productivity, if you say we are talking about increasing livestock intensification of the entire livestock production system, but this intensification is coming, defined as sustainable intensifications. As the SSP1 says, the feed efficiency is more towards the protein based, which makes least emissions from the NTIC fermentation. So we are talking about sustainable intensification under this.
And that also allows for manure management related emissions.
Yes, this also allows for.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then with the fruit and vegetable part, so you did mention the consumption would go up and there will be a bit more dependence as far as that is concerned. But do we look at some sort of agroforestry or peri-urban horticulture promotion where there's a lot more local reliance on fruit and vegetable availability because there's easy market to the cities, right?
Yeah, I mean, we are supplementing our results with that. We are not included that, but we are stressing out that okay, this kind of policy can be promoted to if you want to achieve this EAT-Lancet recommendations. So connecting with your questions, I would like to answer the question related to what would be dairy products used between India versus global. It's actually decreasing under certain policy scenarios when we are talking about the EAT-Lancet recommendations. Under the current trend, it's not increasing. We are seeing that under respect to the current trend, we have seen that the demand for livestock product is increasing. But when we are implementing EAT-Lancet, which overall says after a certain period of time, there will be decreasing demand of dairy products when it's going down at India level and the world level also.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think there would be a lag in the way you implement EAT-Lancet, right? Because different income levels, there is behavioral change will take time, aspiration to have better food, etc.
Yeah. I think there is one pending question from Mr. Saurabh Sugha, machine learning and AI. So I would maybe just say that this is not very connected, but we can also say that we may connect anything and everything because every farm, every animal, we need to follow and we need to map. So that is a very aspirational target. Of course, AI and machine learning can help how the productivity yield has been at a farm and how climate and weather has changed. So if anything, if monsoon is delayed by 15 days, we should be able to look at the same plot of land for last 30 years and say that this is how we could address this and this is how you can expect. So AI and machine learning can really contribute a lot in agriculture sector, but I think the challenge is coming because this sector is not paying sector in a way too much. So I think all these things will come when somebody can sense a business and see a business there. So
I just wanted to add that this is, of course, a very important question, but that's not directly related to what we are saying. We have I offer I think 35 odd session course in total on these issues on agribusiness management, and certainly this is very important. They are very important models, as so they can be related to adaptation in terms of if you can optimize the prices, if you can optimize the supply chain, which means you increase the share of the farmer in the price across the value chain. That is where AI/ML also from production side in terms of prediction, when to crop, precision agriculture. That is where maximum AI/ML can be used in terms of precision agriculture, which of course is related to irrigation and resources. So this is a huge topic. I mean, I was just going to separately respond to Saurabh, but thank you, Professor Amit. But here we are talking about what can we, what are the potential futures we are looking for in India? So just to add the water discussion, and I think, one of our next presentations will be results from the water. We are looking very, in detail in terms of the water use. So what can the model do? So just if we go back to our results, we can see what we are saying is that by 2050 in our sustainable pathway, we are being able to achieve this sustainable pathway because we are seeing that so our model calculation is saying that we need to reduce our water use for agriculture by 11%. Currently, it is to an extent of, I think, 70% odd. Vartika, correct me if I'm wrong. But we need to substantially reduce. So this is again what the model is saying. The model is feeding all of this, and what it throws out in an integrated fashion tells us that, okay, you can achieve 2050 targets, healthy diets, mitigation, forestry, but that will require 11% reduction in water use in agriculture. Again, how can we do that, and how are we able to meet that in model? By moving away from cereals and livestock. The cereals, rice and wheat, they're very, very water intensive. We move towards fruit, nuts, vegetables, if we do that and improve the environmental flows, then we can actually achieve that. So that is what we can go to the policymakers and say, look, if we move towards sustainable diets, which means moving towards from animal-based protein, from intense rice-based, cereal-based consumption to more diversified dietary systems, which are more water friendly, which are more less livestock intensive, then we can achieve these goals. But then policymakers will ask, but on what basis you are saying? And this is the basis we are saying, because when we feed all of this, we can actually achieve that optimal outcome. So this is how this model can be used. I'm also speaking from the perspective of those who would like to take it up as a more serious subject matter for study, for research. So that is the kind of thing we are discussing. Thank you.
So thank you very much to Professor Ranjan and Dr. Chandan for very, very engaging talk, and maybe taking us through uncharted territories, because these we do not talk much about, and we only talk about energy, as you rightly said, and we talk about other issues. But I think agriculture is one of the most difficult sector to abate. That's what I've been telling internationally, because we are dealing with dispersed micro farmers, micro plots. And just if you say that, oh, because of climate change, methane is coming out to be too much, you please change the feed of your livestock. It is difficult to tell to a farmer, a poor farmer at that. So thank you very much to all the participants, to all of you who have listened to Ranjan and Chandan and also kept engaged. Thank you very much. I take the honor of closing this talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Amit. Thank you very much, all the participants, and we would be very happy to continue our interactions and take your feedback outside this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.